Hi everyone, my name is Dylan, and today I'd like to give you a quick introduction to the mask tool, which has a wide range of creative applications when designing in GoDaddy Studio. So let's jump in and take a look. Now you'll find the mask tool in the editing toolbar at the bottom of your screen when you're working on a layer or editing a layer. And if you scroll to the right hand side, there just second from the end is the mask tool. And what the mask tool essentially does is erase certain sections of a layer, typically in order to interact with the layer beneath it. So you'll see there are 4 different modes for using the mask tool. The first 2 are for masking and the second 2 are for unmasking, which is exactly as it sounds. It's the same process in reverse. So let's just take a look. The first option, the first button here is for masking with a hard edge. Just going to undo that, and then the second option is for masking with a soft feathered edge. And then, as I mentioned, the second 2 options here are for unmasking, again with either a soft edge or a hard edge. The mask tool only comes in one brush size, but if you do want to start working in more detail, it's very easy to just pinch in and zoom. And that enables you to get a little bit closer to detailed sections for finer work. And obviously the same applies when you are unmasking too. Now you'll notice that the mask tool works on individual layers rather than over your entire design. So you'll see now I've been editing the photographic image, but if I switch my layer to the text, you'll see that I'm now isolating that layer to only use the mask tool on the text. And then similarly, if I isolate the graphic layer beneath the image, you'll see that the masking only applies to that specific layer. Alright, so that's what the mask tool is and what it does. The next question, of course, is how can you use it creatively when designing? And for me, top of that list is creating a subtle sense of depth, especially when working with text on images. So in this example, I just have this simple layer of text, and it's sitting on top of this photographic image of a horizon. And what I would like to do is create the illusion of this text being behind the horizon, almost as though it's rising like the sun. So I'm going to select the text layer, hit edit. In fact, a great tip before you even get to the mask tool is to stop by the opacity function when you are working with text on images. And what I like to do is just reduce the opacity somewhere around 50%, and that just makes it a lot easier for me to see what's behind the text when I'm masking it. So you'll see now when I jump onto the mask tool, it's a lot easier for me to see where the boundary is, where I need to be masking. And I'm just going to do a pretty quick job here for the sake of demonstration. Before I finish, I'm just going to bring the opacity back up. And there you go. You see I've achieved the effect of that text sitting behind the water rather than just on top of the image. One thing I really love about the mask tool is how a very subtle application can yield a very powerful result. So in this example, I've just masked a small section on the text where the skateboarder's hand and cap overlap. And just with those subtle adjustments, you see it creates a very powerful effect of this text almost floating in the 3-dimensional space of this image. Again, subtlety is the name of the game in this example. You see all I've done is just mask out a very small section of the loop on this L, and just that tiny edit does a lot of work in making it feel as though the text and the image are interacting, almost as though the stem of the rose is going right through the loop of that L. Here again, the application is very, very minor, just masking a small section of that D, but the final result is quite powerful, making it feel as though the dancer is almost leaping right through those letters. I mentioned already that the mask tool can be used on images, graphics, shapes, and text. And a very useful application of using the mask tool is just to modify or slightly edit a given graphic. So in this example, I found this really interesting pattern of hands. And what I would like to do is just make a little bit of space for some text. So I'm going to hit edit, move on over to the mask tool, and pinching in, I'm just going to mask out these two hands in particular, and what that does is it just creates a little bit of space for me to bring in this text. It sits perfectly right there. Another very useful application of the mask tool is making subtle edits to individual graphics. So in this example, you may have found the perfect bird graphic for your new logo, but you just don't really need those stars underneath. So again, let's just head on over to the mask tool, and you'll see how easy it is just to essentially erase those two stars and modify this graphic in line with your specific needs. Right, now playing around with the interaction of graphics and photographic images is where you can really start to get creative with the mask tool. In this example, I'm just worked with two layers, a stripe of paint and this photographic image. I'm just going to unmask to show you what I did. Really quite simple. You just put this paint layer on top of the image and mask out the sections that overlap with the subject in the photograph. And again, creates this wonderful sense of depth and something quite visually interesting to look at. And then once you begin to understand the principle of masking, you can start to have a lot of fun creating really playful interactions between graphics and photographs. So in this example, I'm just going to unmask some of what I did just to show you how you can play around with selective masking, creating the impression that some of these graphics are behind the model, some are in front of him. And you'll see that the final result feels almost as though he's standing in a swirl of these graphics in a three-dimensional space. Alright, now in the early days of GoDaddy Studio, the mask tool was necessary to remove images from the background. And as you can see, as you can imagine, it's quite a painstaking, slow work that required a very steady hand. But thankfully we don't have to do that anymore, because of course we now have the remove image background tool, which does a much better job in a much quicker time. You simply tap the button once to remove the background, and you'll see it does an incredible job of isolating the foreground figure. But what it's also done in this example is just include some of the shadow, and I'd like to remove that. So now the mask tool comes in really handy just for fine-tuning any remove background applications that you do. It's really easy just to neaten up the final result like that. Similarly, in this example, I removed the background to incorporate the image of this woman into the design, but just as I'm tidying it up, I realized that it sticks out a bit at the bottom there, so I'm going to call on the mask tool just to make those final adjustments and put everything perfectly in its right place. Those are just some of the creative applications for this incredible tool. Why don't you try it out for yourself by downloading the free app right now? All the links you need are in the description below. Thanks so much for watching. Please remember to subscribe if you want to keep learning about GoDaddy Studio, and I'll see you next time.